Welcome everyone to another one of these fantastic sessions on behalf of the board. We're delighted to have PwC sponsor a very important discussion, and I'm sure you all read the description of the session. I know myself that sitting in my boardroom, this is AI, machine learning is a frequent topic. And we all want to know how to help the company deploy while managing the risks of deploying more artificial intelligence for our operational efficiency, new attack, address new opportunity. So today we are actually so blessed to have two wonderful experts in this area joining us to have this discussion with you. And as always, we want this to be very interactive because they're here for you, for your benefit. So we want to address the questions that are on your mind. Jane Allen from PwC, who is a West Coast lead for the very important area of information management, risk management, and as well as the information governance. And of course, we all know that is a critical aspect, and she does it for across the industries, many industries that we all serve on the board. And we'll forgive her that she's a Berkeley Bear fan, right? And then of course, Michelle Lee, who is also from the Bay Area, having gone to Stanford for her JD. Michelle is the amazing expert in this area. We're so lucky to have her, combining her technical expertise from her MIT master in computer science and electrical engineering and her JD and all the amazing experience she has. I remember meeting her while she was serving as the CEO under Obama administration for the IP licensing office, and just amazed about the level of expertise that she has. And of course, she has been, evolved so much through her experience with Amazon Web Service and other assignments. So today we will have Jane and Michelle lead us in discussing what type of AI knowledge that we as board member need to have in order to help our company, as I said, take advantage while managing the risk of this. So with no further ado, Jane, I'll let you take from here.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And I want to start by just thanking NACD and thanking you, Claudia and Michelle. I can't tell you how honored I am to be amongst both of you, just such accomplished, incredible, amazing women. And on the heels of Asian American Pacific Islander Month, myself being of Chinese descent, just even more so in terms of, I look at you both as just folks I look up to, certainly very much from a professional and personal standpoint. So thank you. So thanks everyone for joining us today. This topic is just so relevant and so prevalent in so many conversations. And Michelle, if you don't mind, I was thinking we would just start with some level setting and sort of set the table of really just describing what is AI and how does that really differ from a lot of other terms and acronyms we hear, such as ML, like machine learning and such.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to NACD for having me on. Let me just start. AI is the simple use of computers to simulate human intelligence. That can be done with logic. It can be done with if-then rules, as well as machine learning. And so examples are prevalent throughout our life. The spelling and the grammar checker in our email or our Word application. The digital voice assistant in our home. Robots on a manufacturing floor designed to perform a single task. Or facial recognition technology, or even a computer program that plays chess against a human being. Machine learning is a very important subset of artificial intelligence that uses math and statistical processes to create models that find patterns in vast amounts of data to make predictions and draw inferences that are helpful in the future.
So with that, I think about, for instance, my older parents or my young teenage daughter. And if they were to hear that, they would think, wow, that's really neat. And oh, that's the technology that shows me the type of, shopping clothes that I like to see and such when I look at my Instagram feed and such. But it's more than that. And maybe if you could describe really what is all, I'll say the hype, positive and negative around this. And what's so different? Because technically this technology has been around for quite a while, but why now and what's so different?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jane. Actually, the term AI was coined in 1956 at a workshop that was held at Dartmouth College in the summer. And there were a group of computer science experts discussing the possibility of an electronic brain. Now, we are nowhere near, in my opinion, computers replacing all forms of human cognition. But I do believe that machine learning, you'll recall, is a subset of AI that makes predictions based upon data, is now one of the most transformative technologies in our generation, and the technology is ripe now. So why now, right? As opposed to decades ago when the coin was first invented, the term was first coined. And I would say it's three factors, Jane. One is the power of computing has increased significantly over the past several decades. Two, the price of storage has dropped significantly. So that means all businesses are recording all kinds of data, including all the customer transactions, purchases, reviews, and they're keeping it forever. So you'll remember in the olden days, storage was expensive and you had to take it off the prime server and move it onto a tape and then you deleted it. Well, with the price of storage dropping and the power of computing increasing, and now the third element with cloud computing, basically every organization has access to powerful computing and the ability to store their data. The combination of all three of those factors means that companies are saving all kinds of data and they can gain insights from them by using very, very powerful computers to identify the trends and the patterns and make projections about future occurrences that could be helpful for the business.
So Michelle, at Amazon Web Services, you had the opportunity to really get into large initiatives, helping companies across all sorts of industries and scenarios really sort of maximize their ROI on leveraging some of this technology. What you just described is massive, but can you maybe bring it to life with a few concrete examples around
Sure. So I had the opportunity to see so many incredible use cases across all industries. And for our audience today, I'm just going to choose 5 diverse industries and give you some ideas of a couple of use cases in each. And hopefully when you hear these examples, you can think in your companies, on your boards, if we can do that for that company, I wonder if we could do that for my company. So let me start with a decidedly low-tech industry, the food and restaurant business, Domino's Pizza. Okay, they created a predictive ordering system for pizza that is so precise that it allows Domino pizzas to have a hot pizza ready for pickup within 3 minutes of hitting send on the online order, or delivered to your home within 20 minutes. Now, whether you're a fan of Domino's pizzas or not, you have to admit that is an incredible user experience. And what are they doing? They're looking at decades of data about who buys what flavor of pizza, pepperoni, cheese, or sausage at this time of day, at this location, this time of year, maybe around Super Bowl time, to pre-prepare pizzas so that they can put it into the oven so that it's hot and ready to go for pickup within 3 minutes or 20 minutes within delivery, all using sort of data analytics and machine learning. Let's go to the healthcare and life science industry. They are able now to use, to detect medical ailments before clinical manifestation. So in the case of Cerner, using patient medical record information, of course anonymized, to identify congestive heart failure up to 15 months before clinical manifestation. Or using intelligent automated claims processing. I mean, the insurance processing, heavily document intensive, who couldn't benefit from computer vision and extracting out relevant information to process claims. Also, accelerated drug discovery. So that's the healthcare life science industry. In the retail sector, I mean, so many businesses are now having to move online. So personalized product recommendations. Think Amazon, they know what I want to buy even before I know what I want to buy. Demand forecasting, management of supply chain, and optimal routing of items for delivery, whether you're Walmart, Costco, or what have you, going to the ESG part of the E, right? If you can optimally route delivery of items to your customers, you benefit the E in the ESG part of it. Moving to financial services, fraud detection and identifying out of the ordinary transactions, enhancing the customer experience. So for example, identity verification using facial recognition technology and or voice recognition technology, all driven by AI. And even if you think about it, when you call into your bank and you go through the chain of like automated decision points, you can use now AI to detect the customer sentiment. Is the customer happy? Are they getting what they want? Are they getting frustrated? And therefore, might you need to escalate to a supervisor to resolve the matter more quickly? So these are just some examples in the financial services industry. If we move to the industrial and the manufacturing sector, very common use cases include equipment monitoring, social distancing and safety compliance detection. Predictive maintenance is also very common. Georgia Pacific has some very heavy, expensive machines that they use to make their rolls and rolls of construction paper. And basically, they mix the slurry of pulp and water and starch. And there's a foreman who used to walk on the factory floor to listen to aberrational vibrations. They're not doing that anymore. They're recording and they're putting sensors on the machines. And then out of the recording of that sound, they're using AI and computer vision to detect aberrational behavior, and they're going to predictively, and they are predictively bringing down machines that show aberrational vibrations before the whole factory floor comes to a screeching halt because one machine breaks down, and that's expensive. So predictive maintenance, automatic quality inspection, a semiconductor company that uses a computer vision system with a camera to watch the printed circuit boards going down the conveyor belt to identify missing or misplaced components. Look, that's a mind-numbingly dull job for a human. And computers do it so much better and so much more accurately. So why not let them do it? And if you step back more generally, for any business, enhancing marketing effectiveness, machine learning can be used to better predict customer churn, allowing for intervention to prevent. And you can provide more precise cross-selling opportunities. If you bought A, you might consider B. All of these initiatives are use cases I think almost every business has the need for. And these are examples of use cases that increase operational efficiencies or increase the customer experience. But I want to share with the audience an example of where a business actually found a new product line and a new business line. So I just returned from my meeting at MassMutual. And for those of you who know, MassMutual is a 150-year-old insurance company, and they have 150 years worth of data on mortality, morbidity, and the pricing of insurance premiums. So of course, they're using machine learning models to predict that ever more accurately to, and any kind of incremental increased accuracy in the prediction of those statistics goes straight to the bottom line. And they are also able to lower the prices and offer it to more individuals. So that goes to the operational efficiency side of the business. But what they have then done is with the models that they've trained on this 150-year set of data, they are now creating a cloud-based SaaS service where they are allowing other companies to buy and basically use the predictive analytics from their 150 years worth of data. So as you're sitting in the boardroom, are you using the data to, of course, increase your operational efficiencies and enhance customer experiences? But if you have a unique data advantage, might there be a business opportunity for a new line of business to create a new source of revenue for your companies? And these are just a few examples.
Michelle, my mind is swirling, right? Because I think we each think of many examples that are obvious to us. But as you go through all the scenarios, I mean, it's clear that one, it's intertwined in so much of business and how we live today, whether we know it or not. And two, just the incredible power between, as you mentioned, efficiency, in some cases, safety, speed, new products and services. If I step back and let me ask you as a board member, what should board members be thinking, or what do they think they need to know strategically for their entities as to how they need to be thinking about AI potentially as a part of their strategy or whether it's being leveraged.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly, I think every company has these opportunities. And the only question is, um, what are your competitors doing? And what are you doing? And do you have the opportunity to, I think, right, if your competitor's doing it, I think you need to do it, right? That's just, those are table stakes. You need to compete. And if somebody ups the ante, you need to be there too. But I would also take a look and see, I think the important part of it is, where do your companies have a data advantage and have the opportunity to lead? And it could be something that has never been done before by any of your competitors, but you look at that and you say, we've got this data, or no one has moved in that area. Let's do it. Let's be the first one. And that's where you pull ahead of the pack, and it's hard for others to play catch up, right? You'd much rather be the leader. So going back to it, as you're sitting in the boardroom and we have these annual strategic sessions, right? And we hear about the competitive environment, I would be listening really carefully to, are they considering the AI machine learning use cases? Because the machine learning technology in particular is ripe. And if you're not hearing considerations and how this might weave its way into the business, and it's not every aspect, every problem, but I would be listening for that, because that's the opportunity. Why not? Where's the opportunity? And that's so critical. I think that's so necessary if you think about the ability to remain competitive. I think in the next 5 to 10 years is going to hinge upon use of this technology in the right places, in the right manner, in the organization.
So with that, Michelle, if I may ask, just based on your vast experience in seeing this, and especially, again, I took notes on the different industries, some I knew of and some I did not. So this was just fabulous. What do you think are some of the key success factors, to leveraging AI or machine learning as part of AI for these big initiatives or projects that companies might be undertaking?
Yes. So of the many machine learning projects I've been involved in, let me distill for the audience. I think there are at least 4 critical components. One is selecting the appropriate use case. 2 is, of course, having the necessary data, because all of this is driven by the data. 3 is having the talent in the company across the business units, and importantly, also on the board to oversee and implement these solutions. And then 4th is having a culture and a longer term time horizon that permits experimentation and iterative improvements to achieve superior performance.
So along those lines, I come from a background oftentimes serving corporate in-house counsel, external counsel on sometimes some unfortunate situations, catastrophic regulatory inquiries, investigations, and the like. And so I often always think of these things as a teeter-totter. Just, you have sort of the risk and the reward equation, right? And we've talked quite a bit about just the tremendous reward side of it for businesses and for consumers. Probably so much more that we have not even imagined yet, and is just coming to us soon in the next few years. But from the risk equation, how do you think about some of the topics that also are front and center? Maybe I'll start with ethics and fairness. I've heard the term ethical AI, responsible AI.
Yeah.
How do we think about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to jump to that question, but if you would, Jane, if you could allow me to share with our audience members a little bit about the selecting of the use cases when they're sitting in the boardroom, and some questions that they might ask that will be helpful to them as they kind of determine if the company is perhaps heading in a fruitful direction. But don't let me forget your question, because that is also an incredibly important question. So, selecting an appropriate use case for machine learning, as a board member, what questions would you ask? So I would ask, what business problem is it trying to solve? And is machine learning the best solution for this problem? Because not all problems are best solved by machine learning. Remember, machine learning draws inferences based upon poring over vast bodies of data, versus conventional software where the computer program is literally very explicitly telling the computer what to do. It is entirely possible that in a machine learning solution, the computer program does not know in advance what the computer will draw as an inference. And that's both the beauty and the strength and the power of machine learning technology. It looks at the data and identifies patterns that humans would not. So problems that are complex requiring consideration of a myriad of fluctuating factors that must be performed at scale are ideal. So let me give you an example. Those of you might use Zillow, right? It gives you an estimate of the price of properties literally anywhere you want, as far as I'm concerned, across the United States and beyond. But it does require consideration of a myriad of fluctuating factors, such as the number of bedrooms, the bathrooms, the age of the property, was it renovated? If so, when? Sales of recent and comparable homes in the neighborhood. What time of year is it? Is it spring and summer, or are we in the dead of winter? And it has to do this all for hundreds of millions of properties. This is a complex problem requiring consideration of a myriad of fluctuating factors that need to be performed at scale, hundreds of millions of properties. Simple if-then rules don't work, but machine learning actually works really well. And that's exactly what Zillow does. So ask yourself and ask the company, is this the right use of machine learning for the solution? And what business problem are you trying to solve? And I always get very nervous when the chief data officer or the AI expert comes in and is like, we've got this great use case and we think we can do this. And there's no business champion, because I have seen so many projects fail where there's a great proof of concept. It illustrates some functionality, but at the end of the day, it never gets implemented because there's no business buy-in. So when they're presenting the use case, is there business buy-in? Are there concrete metrics for success? And on what time horizon do you think this will be completed? Is this a must do yesterday because the competitors are doing it and we have to do it? Or is this an opportunity to lead? And is the timeline realistic? Because these machine learning models, I mean, keep in mind, the way they work is you take the data, you learn from the data, they make predictions, and then really it's an iterative process. You need to feed it more data, then it incrementally improves, and then over time, it can exceed the promise of the performance of your conventional systems. So there is a period of time, and as a board member, right, is this the right use case? Because if you choose the wrong use case, it won't go anywhere, and it could be done better solved by other solutions, including conventional software programming solutions.
So Michelle, along those lines, you mentioned sort of the chief data officer, the AI expert. There's all sorts of different terms I've seen of titles and such. From a board perspective and what they should be asking leadership of the entities, what do you think, what's leadership's role in that, right? They're relying on these experts. They're clearly should be thinking for the strategy of the company and protection of, forward increase in growth and such. But, what is leadership's role and commitment, and even I would say level of knowledge that they should have on this topic?
Yeah, so I'm of the firm belief that business leaders should have basic AI awareness and basic AI training. And I don't mean to the point where they're actually going to code anything or implement anything, but they need to know, like, of the myriad of use cases I rattled off, right? Are they aware of what is being done and what can be done with this technology, so that when they are confronted with a business problem, in their toolbox of tools to use to solve the problem, they're considering machine learning. Now, it doesn't mean, like I said, they have to solve it. They can pull in their data scientists, but you have to be able to spot the opportunity, because these data scientists, even if you have them within your organizations, they're typically in one part of the organization. They're not integrated deeply in the business, although sometimes they are. But the business leaders in every part of the business, in sales, in product, in HR, in marketing, they should have some sense of and be able to identify the data assets they have and how the data assets may be leveraged using machine learning technology to increase operational efficiencies, to increase the customer experience, or potentially, as with Mass Mutual, to drive a new line of business. And really, like I said, that's not learning how to program in Python. That is, what can this technology do? What are the use cases across industries? In my industry, what are my competitors doing? And what might I do? And data is a critical piece of that. Do they view data as an asset in the corporation? Does the company, as a leader, Do the leaders, do they have a data strategy for the organization? Have they inventoried it, right? Is there easy, compliant access and secure access to all the data by all who might benefit from that? And the reason why it's important is because some of the most powerful machine learning models are built by combining data from different parts of the organization. So as the leader of an organization, are you pulling together, do you know what data assets you have? So, you know, leaders, it's not easy, right? The data is all over the place in the organization. It's on different platforms, it's in different formats. Some of the data is in the cloud, some is on the premises. And there's a tendency for departments to hang on to their data. We call it data hugging. The data that I collected is my data, and yeah, nobody needs to see it or use it. But that's not true. Some of the most powerful machine learning models, as I said, are developed and used by looking comprehensively at all the data and thinking, if we combine this data with that data, how could we better drive the operations, improve customer experiences, or what have you? So that's a really powerful point for the leaders and for the board members to ask. I would be asking, do you have a data strategy? What data do you have today that's easily accessible, and how might you leverage it? What data is not available today, but with a small amount of effort could be made available, and how might you take advantage of it? And I think this last question is even more important, which is, what data don't you have today, but thinking 1 year from now, you will want to have, and what steps are you taking today to begin collecting it?
So Michelle, in that, I feel like there's an underlying theme of, I'm going to say, governance that relies on leadership, which I think is incredibly multidimensional in this topic. And so maybe I'll start in one area, and we had a question that kind of pops in that I think fits under this broader piece of governance, which I think you started kind of going down that path a little bit. And one of them is about, you talked about internal talent and the team of data scientists and such. The reality is many companies are also working with and leveraging a number of different external partners to get this work done. And how should they be thinking? What are the considerations of the right partners, the risk associated with those partners, the rigor of what you should expect? How should board members be thinking about that as part of the broader strategy?
Yeah, so on the topic of talent, that's a very good question, Jane. This talent is, well, this whole industry is new, right? These developments are very recent. So the talent here is extremely scarce. And as a person who tried to build these teams, and it's hard to get, they're expensive, especially now with the rising salaries. So it is, I mean, companies are trying to hire, they're trying to build, but you may decide as a business that you don't want those fixed cost resources within your organization. And in which case, of course, there's nothing wrong with using partners. I'm agnostic to that, right? You bring in the expertise that you need as a business leader to see what is the art of the possible and the art of the practical, to identify your highest return on investment machine learning use cases. And it doesn't really matter whether it comes from your team or an external team. But what I will say, in my experience, your domain experts have to be working with either the external or the AI data scientists to identify those very high return on investment use cases, because the people who have the domain expertise, right, they know the frictions, they'll understand whether or not, how much additional performance will be needed from the machine learning solution in order to be better than the present system. No need to change if it's not going to be better. But I think that domain expertise is critical. So whether you have your data scientists in-house working side by side with your domain experts or an external partner, just make sure they're working closely together, because even after you've identified the high return on investment use cases, then there's the building of the models, the training. Is that as good as the current system? Is it missing things, right? The domain expert's going to know that. And the data scientists may not, but only by working with the domain expert will they be able to make an even better system.
And maybe a second part to that question of thinking partners from a technology or vendor perspective. Certainly the board needs to trust that you've got folks in place that apply standard rigor in the selection of any kind of software or such. But at the board level, are there risk considerations or questions they need to ask? Why this technology versus that technology? Why this cloud provider versus that cloud provider? And just high level risk, just thinking of the people and the technology perspective of it.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, right? I mean, there's going to be use of a lot of data, and the data, of course, has to be um, stored and used in compliance with privacy, terms of use, and all the regulations around data and privacy. So, of course, whatever partner you're working with, right, is you're going to want to make sure that they comply with all of that. So, um, you know, many of the reputable ones will, but that's one thing. I mean, I would be paying attention to, because it's very easy to run afoul of some of those, you know, those required those rules, in essence.
Another question, again, I'm going to put it in that same bucket of sort of the governance and the leadership and the right people. We have a question that came in, and how critical is it to have a formal chief data officer? It is a growing role. I've started to see even certain business units have their own data officers as well. So curious as to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I get asked that a lot. Should we have a chief data officer? Should we have like an AI center of excellence, or should it be embedded in the various business units? I do think, you know, whether it's a chief data officer or whether it's led by the very senior leader, perhaps even the CEO, the company needs to have a data strategy for all the reasons that I mentioned, right? You need to break down the data silos by department. You need to combine data. You need to create oftentimes a data lake with secure, compliant access by all. And that's going to involve engineering and kind of more sort of broader global shared resources to develop that. But as to whether or not you have the AI expertise in an AI center of excellence through a chief data officer, or you sort of embed that functionality in each of the business units as an organizational matter, I think it depends upon the culture of the company. It will vary by company. And I've seen it work both ways. But the most important thing, I think the most important thing, is to provide broader business leader training, AI awareness, if you will, for all of the business. I mean, I'm not talking the technologists, right? All the business leaders, so that they can to identify and they can flag and think, is this a possibility? I wonder if, and then they go and they ask the expert within the organization, whether that's in the AI Center of Excellence, whether it's the chief data officer, but you want to identify these opportunities, have them raised, and follow through on them as appropriate.
And going along those lines, this will feed into the next question. There is so much hype over this, right? And there's, you know, legitimate excitement and I'll say ROI again to be captured in various ways. That there's almost too much or folks getting overly excited, right? And so the titles, again, I'm seeing functional. I met with a large global bank. They have a chief legal data officer, right? So they have multiple data officers. But one of the dangers, and one of our board members on the line asked the question, is sort of the overselling of what AI ML can do to boards, right? That this is the magical, you know, unicorn wand right here. And, you know, what are some of the considerations about the right subject matter experts? I think you touched upon that, such that these big initiatives, of which companies can and have poured tremendous amount of resources into, to help ensure they don't fail along the way.
Yeah. So on the issue of overselling, last thing we want is for anybody to oversell anything. In fact, if you think about AI in the 80s and 90s, it was oversold and there were expert systems that were going to really, you know, revolutionize the world, and that really didn't happen. So on the notion of overselling, I mean, there's a lot of risk too associated with these AI algorithms. And you had raised it a little bit, Jane, in your question. And if you don't mind, I'd like to touch upon that. But in terms of the expertise and, you know, not overselling, I think it goes back to, before I go to sort of the risks associated with AI, and there are many, and so as not to oversell, as board members, we have to keep the calm. We have to weigh both the pros and the cons, and we're overseeing these initiatives. But I think going back, right, selecting the right use cases, selecting cases, and, you know, along the lines of what I described before, choosing smaller projects, starting small, and selecting projects that can show early traction or early signs of failure. If early traction, double down. If early signs of failure, stop it and move to something else. So not choosing these huge transformational, right, solve everything problems, but clear metrics, early signs of traction for use cases that are best solved by machine learning. Those are the key, that's how you sort of ensure that you get the greatest return on investments. And every company has so many opportunities. So it's a question of choosing which one is ripest given your data, which one is ripest given the friction or the business need of the company, which one is ripest in terms of the business unit willing to incorporate it and working it into its business processes to enhance performance. These are all factors to take into account in selecting the use case and as a board member overseeing the appropriate application of AI to the business.
There's a lot of, in selecting some of these projects, right? And you said that the overselling, and I think what you sort of described as a bit of a pilot, right? That you can really, and then expand from there. And I think some of the examples I've seen more recently that perhaps don't sound as glamorous, but contracting, I think that's an area that's really hot right now in terms of companies leveraging AI. Doesn't sound super glamorous, but as companies get into mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, working with other partners, updating terms for a variety of reasons and changes in regulations, I think that's one that we've seen, not so glamorous, produce major ROI, and then sort of propagate into a number of other more strategic areas as well. You started to touch a little bit about the risk piece from the governance.
Yeah.
Maybe if we step back, because there's a lot of, I believe, tentacles in that. If we step back from a board perspective, whether it be full board or certain committees, where does the thinking around this lie? I've heard different discussions, whether it be wrapped up into ESG, into ERM, sometimes cyber. Curious what you've seen and what your thoughts of who needs to own that from a board perspective.
So I will answer that question, but let me share for the audience a little bit about the risks. And in listening to the risks, then we can talk about who best and what committee or what part of the board is best suited to handle this. So with all the advantages of machine learning in terms of potential to transform the business, there are a lot of risks too, that as a board member, we all have to be paying attention to, including perpetuating existing biases, because the data that these machine learning algorithms were trained on may contain historical biases. Also, keep in mind that these machine learning models pour over vast bodies of data, and there's little transparency and little explainability on how it came to that conclusion. So as a board member, you got to think, is this a use case where it matters how the computer system came to the conclusion, or not so much so? If you're making a Netflix movie recommendation, it doesn't really matter. But if you're making a medical diagnosis, or if you're on the legal side and you're providing a recommended sentencing recommendation, it might matter. So let me share with the audience some real life examples of biased AI systems in a number of contexts, and then sort of as a board member, what you can do to ask to make sure that the AI systems are fair, performing well, and so forth. So in October of 2019, Optum had this AI algorithm, and it was used over more than 200 million people in US hospitals to predict which patients would likely need extra medical care. And it turns out the algorithm heavily favored white patients over Black patients. Now, race was not a variable in this algorithm, but what was a variable that highly correlated with race. It turns out for a whole variety of reasons that Black patients spend less historically than white patients with the same medical ailments. So this particular algorithm made a prediction on the medical needs and prioritized more highly those with greater medical needs based upon their past historical medical spend. So clearly that was not the right outcome. Now, Optum ultimately fixed that, right? So if you're a board member at Optum, right, that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be. And there are other examples too. For example, Amazon, many of you recall the hiring algorithm that favored men over women. Why? Because it was trained on decades of data where most of the applicants were men rather than women. So, when you're sitting in the boardroom I guess what I would say is, it could be handled in the, I guess, on the audit committee where a lot of risk is handled, but I actually don't think that that's the best place. I think oftentimes these are broader conversations at the board level. I mean, if you're talking as cybersecurity, you're using AI and machine learning for cybersecurity risk, maybe that's the audit committee where the cyber risk typically is handled. But more generally, as you look at the board members, I mean, these are just sort of common sense human things. I mean, we all know there are sensitivities around AI applications. So every board member has been a human being on this planet, and they're going to be aware of the sensitivities. And the questions to ask are things like, if this use case of AI were published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and the use of the data of the customers were published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, how would the company, how would the board, how would each board member feel about it? And could they defend, I mean, could they feel good about that particular use case? And it's better to ask that question up front before you've launched it and integrated it and used it than to have to confront that question after it's been discovered, right? And then you're asking yourself, ooh, maybe we don't feel so comfortable with that. So going back to your question, Jane, I really do think, I mean, these are issues that every board member has the opportunity to contribute to. And for example, I just returned from my MassMutual board meeting, and it's discussed on a board-wide basis. That board also happens to have a technology and governance committee. Not all boards do, but certainly if you have a technology committee, that's also a very natural place to discuss those issues. But a lot of this is just as human beings and as a member of the board and understanding the culture and the values of the company, is the company and is the board comfortable with these use cases, with the use of this data? Because there can be sensitivities around use of AI.
For our PwC board, and granted, we're a private company, we have a technology and people committee because we're so professional services people intensive. We also have a risk and quality. So oftentimes we have a joint committee meeting on both those to talk about it. But you're right, there's not one way that I've seen at other entities either. So it's oftentimes a question.
Yeah. If I could also add too on that kind of governance piece of it, as a board member, whether you're on the technology or governance committee or whether it's board wide, let me just throw in a couple more questions that the board members might ask. Right. Would you feel comfortable if it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? Also, what processes and procedures does the company have in place to ensure accurate and non-biased results in its AI systems? What is being done to ensure the quality and the diversity of the data that is used to train the machine learning model? And how are models being tested for bias? And importantly, who is doing the testing? Because there have been studies done where, for example, white male computer programmers who wrote the models or created the models test it and they don't see the bias. So is it important to have a separate group, sort of a red team, blue team, who can look at it with fresh eyes, with fresh data to test the models? Or if the stakes are even more important, is it important to, and I would ask this as a board member, is it important to get a third-party tester completely outside the organization to test? Or if the stakes are really high, might you want to get a governmental agency like the National Institute of Standards and Testing, NIST, who does test for performance, for example, of computer recognition system? So as a board member, right, you need to weigh the risks. How important, how impactful is the use of AI on things like life, liberty, the ability to earn a living? Because if it implicates those things, provision of medical care, you're really going to want to pay attention, and you're really going to want to make sure it's not biased versus a product recommendation or a movie recommendation. So it does vary. So it's that judgment call between weighing what happens if it's not fair against how much effort you want to do and how much testing you want to do to make sure that you're catching it along the way.
Along the lines of these topics, and another scenario that I think many have heard about of AI gone wrong, unfortunately, and biased is around mortgage lending, similar to one of the other examples you gave, with serious consequences. I know our firm, a number of firms have, responsible AI frameworks. We're starting to see the regulators get involved, use the term explainability. For those of you from various technology companies that may have user content, abroad in the EU, they formalized the Digital Services Act, and one of those pieces is algorithmic explainability. Michelle, maybe I'll ask you, there's a question that also came in here, and I'll start with that one, but there's certainly much broader considerations around sort of the current and sort of looming horizon on some of these regulatory risks, even politically, because it seems to be moving along as well.
Yes, so the regulatory landscape, as you can imagine, is extremely active. And I'm not just talking, actually, the United States is not even the most active. I'm thinking EU and many countries across the globe. I mean, I worked on many and I helped sort of provide input to many of these policies. And I mean, look, it's not lost upon the regulators, the risks of the AI systems, yet the business need is so great. So let me discuss and share with the audience the EU's AI Act proposal, which was introduced in 2021. And why am I focusing on this one? The EU in particular is looking to lead in this area, just as they led with GDPR on privacy. And there's a sense that if the EU Act passes the AI Act, if the EU passes the AI Act, that it is reasonably likely that other countries will follow, so that that becomes the standard. So I think it's helpful for the board members to hear kind of what is proposed in the AI Act. And basically, they outright prohibit certain uses of AI. Because it's far too risky, according to the EU. Things like public authorities' use of a social scoring system, such as what China has. If you have defaulted on a loan, or if you're a criminal, that social scoring system prevents you from getting access to education or certain other benefits within society. The EU's, if the EU AI Act passes, they're saying that category of AI use is not okay. However, there are other categories of AI use that are of varying degrees of risk, and that we are going to require regulatory approval before you enter the EU marketplace. So that's pretty stringent, right? The need to get regulatory approval before introducing your AI service or before using it in the EU, that's a huge market for all of our companies. And they break it down into several categories. There's the high risk category, which includes things like facial recognition, medical diagnoses, giving a loan, as you had mentioned, Jane. And if you're in that category, what they're saying is, it's not that you can't sell into the EU or use that system, but before you do so, it has to be tested by an EU regulator. They have to look at what data was used to train it. They have to determine whether or not there needs to be human oversight in terms of the recommendation, and they will look closely at the cybersecurity precautions that you've taken for your AI system. But if you meet all those checkpoints, you can sell. A next category down is a more limited risk AI category, such as chatbot. And what they say in the proposal is that subject to limited transparency requirements, you can sell into the EU. And the third category is a lower minimal risk AI system, and that basically no regulatory approval is required. But if you fail to comply with this, if it passes, there will be fines of 30 million euros or 6% of the worldwide annual turnover. So as a board member, I would be asking, okay, given the AI strategy, given the AI use cases, where will this be used? And I would ask the management team, how do you think our plan fares against current legislation and the proposed EU AI Act?
And are we prepared?
Are we prepared to adjust, right? And maybe the answer is yes, right? We beef up the transparency, we provide human oversight, or maybe our category use of AI doesn't fall within the high risk and we are good to go. But those are the questions that need to be asked, I think, of management as a board member, and are reasonable to ask.
So I'm looking at time. I have one more sort of broad question, and then I'm going to hit a couple that I see in the chat here. And folks, please do feel free, don't be shy to ask some more. But Michelle, you touched upon a number of different aspects in this conversation, a little bit about cyber, inventorying sort of your data assets that you're going to leverage, the governance around this and the risk. I'm going to add ESG as sort of a hot topic also for boards. And I think there's a lot of intersection of these topics simply because it boils down to the data, right? And how data is interwoven in all of these. Is there a place that you see this going, or how do you see this emerging over time, right? Because I feel like there's sort of the hot burning platform at any time, cyber privacy, and not that those have gone away. We have ESG. AI is mixed in there, perhaps becoming more prevalent as a hot topic, especially as these regulations emerge. Do you see sort of this universe converging in some way? I'm not sure if you can look in the crystal ball a little bit and see how that emerges.
So I'm an optimist, of course, about the use of AI, but I go in eyes wide open also as a lawyer by training and seeing all the risks and the regulatory risks and so forth. I do believe that the use of machine learning has opportunities to improve companies' performance on ESG. So on the environmental prong, right, we can be so much more efficient in reducing our carbon footprint, planning routes, delivery routes, right, to be more efficient in that manner, looking at the data, planning for the optimal path to reduce the carbon footprint. On the social side and the DEI side, companies have lots of historical data on who they hire, who they promote, and what they get paid. Why not run the AI algorithm to see if we continue along our current path, what will our future leadership and talent pool look like? And ask ourselves, is that consistent with our priorities? And if not, what intervention might we offer in terms of leadership training to certain underrepresented groups or additional recruitment resources to target the diversity goals we aim to accomplish? And humans are biased as well. So AI systems may be biased, but humans are also proven to be biased. But with, I think, machine learning, you have the opportunity to look at your historical patterns and trends to see what it might predict and project. And you have the opportunity to then intervene and step in and to improve upon it. So, and on the governance side of things, cybersecurity, I mean, these machine learning algorithm models, I mean, there are companies devoted to it. They're very good at looking at lots and lots of transactions and transfers of data and identifying outlying aberrational behavior. So I think there is the opportunity for machine learning and AI to really enhance our ESG efforts. And the question is, as a board member, are we using it? Does it make sense to use it? At what points and where? But also importantly, on the governance side, right, are we paying attention to the risks of the use of AI? And do we have policies and procedures in place consistent with our corporate values to help guide the use of the AI that the company is using and the data, right, as well?
And ultimately, what would your stakeholders expect of you too?
What would your stakeholders expect? What would your employees expect? How would you feel, as I said, if this were publicly made available? And you got to assume that it would be.
So one of the questions that came in, going back to a bit about board members and leadership having some sort of basic training around AI, again, not going to go code in Python and
right.
such. What do you recommend for that? I mean, certainly I'll say, obviously the professional services firms, often we have various sort of, webcasts and trainings, but Michelle, what would you recommend in terms of sources potentially folks can look at?
Yeah, so what I realized was there was an extreme dearth of kind of business leader training. And now I'm beginning to see a few signs of it. I know, for example, Stanford offers a program. When I was at Amazon Web Services, I specifically created a business leader training because I wanted the business leaders to recognize this. And I mean, Amazon's external customers, but there are a few programs available. I think it's still hard because at the end of the day, and I found like, I led the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I was the CEO of that organization, and I didn't have the AI talent. And I did not have the latest data scientists who I could hire given the salaries that I was paying. And so I do think it's helpful to have somebody come in who is versed on the state of the technology to look at your company's business needs. In your context, what are other people doing in your industry? To look at your data and saying, given your data that you currently have, and given the data that you could potentially have, what are the opportunities? Because at the end of the day, right, everybody talks AI, there are a myriad of like these really high, high level descriptions, but at the end of the day, what's the highest return on investment use cases? and give me a prioritization 1 through 5, and we can decide together what those are, working with the people within the company. But what are the top 5 use cases? Because you can't pursue them all. And at the end of the day, you need to identify a handful of them that are highly impactful, carefully selected. So on the training side, right, of course, I mentioned some of the programs. I would encourage board members. I would encourage all sorts of business. You have to know this now. There's no way in the next 5 to 10 years that you can be an effective business leader without having some sense of this technology. But then how do you translate that into action for a company? It is helpful. I mean, I would have loved to have had somebody come into my agency and say, okay, let's identify those use cases. So, and be really specific and identify those. So in your strategy sessions and in preparation for those strategy sessions, think about suggesting the opportunity for training of business leaders more broadly, and the possibility of having folks with the right expertise come in and look at the business if it has not already been done. And it may already have been done, but even if it's been done before, it doesn't hurt to have a review of the priorities in light of the very rapid advances. Is this still the highest and best use of machine learning in our organization, or might there be better?
One example just fresh off my mind, I just returned from our PwC board meetings, and what we did, we have a multidisciplinary background of board members, as hopefully most organizations do, and we actually traveled to a major global technology provider and had 15-20 minutes of interactive exercises similar that they might provide to C-suite members of various companies, so that people could sort of touch and feel the power of AI application in a couple different scenarios. And we actually sort of, again, at a high level, but I view that as essentially an education for folks to really understand the power of the technology and bring it to life. That's
a great suggestion. Absolutely.
So we just have a couple questions. I'm not sure if folks have any more that they'd like to drop in there. I think it looks like a lot of folks have had a few similar questions around the partners, the governance. I guess if there's no other specific questions, Michelle, I'll leave you any sort of parting thoughts as board members, even whether it's board composition and what they should be looking at going forward. I know we had a lot of really, I think, great and tactical questions that folks can go back and apply. But again, what else would you leave the board members thinking about in this area? Because we could probably meet again in a year and have updates to this.
Right. So in terms of talent and composition, I mean, I would, as a board member, I'd also keep in mind that these are pretty major disruptive changes that could replace the responsibilities of certain employees or even entire jobs of certain employees within the company. So as a board member, right, what jobs, if any, will be replaced? And what is the company doing to transition these individuals that are consistent with its values? And I think that's a conversation worth raising for some of the AI applications. And then more broadly, generally, look, machine learning is right for application now in virtually every organization. And it's a competitive imperative to consider where and how this technology might be applied to achieve strategic advantage. So I think if I were to guess, those companies who are looking at it are probably only acting upon maybe 10, maybe 15% of these opportunities. And I think those companies that adapt quickly will have the opportunity to lead. And those who don't, I mean, if you think about the taxi cab industry and Uber, it's really tough to play catch up. So what I would say is it's not too late. And, this is the time to begin, right, getting smart about it, identifying the opportunities, prioritizing it, and begin implementation. And with a small number of successes initially, I mean, there are some organizations that are extremely advancce in this journey. I mean, Amazon and Disney is one of them as well, but I think most of them, it's still early days, so it's not too late. And wouldn't we rather be in a position of leading rather than playing catch up?
That is a wonderful last for Michelle and Jane. I think we're all smarter now on the topic. And I agree with you, Jane. We need to do this again. It's such a fast evolving subject in terms of level of relevance. So I want to just thank you, Michelle and Jane, for this fantastic discussion for the audience. And also, there's so many suggestions that came in from the chat room, and we're going to share them so you can have all the resources that are being suggested by the participant as well. Thank you all for being here today. And this is another one of the great learning from all of us. So thank you, Jane and Michelle, and we'll see you soon.